You're watching or listening to the Constitution line by line. We have bid farewell and adieu to the original Constitution, and now we're heading into the amendments. I'm Don Frazier. I'm a professor of history. My colleague is Paul Fabrizio, professor of political science.
Yes, indeed.
So how are you going to unpack these amendments?
Okay. What we're going to do with the First Amendment is I'm going to read the whole thing.
Because it's kind of a big deal.
It's a very big deal. I believe it is one of the most litigated parts of the Constitution, if not the most litigated parts of the Constitution, this First Amendment.
That's why the people that were against the Bill of Rights said you shouldn't put it in there. It'll just beg the question. But,
yeah.
All right.
By your defining things, you're going to make it worse,
That's right.
Some people's argument. But other people said, we need to be explicit at what we're proposing,
Correct.
at what we're saying. And so the First Amendment is also called the Freedom of Expression Amendment.
Okay.
And to many framers of the Constitution, you were not a human being unless you could express yourself. And
Amen.
And you express yourself through your religious beliefs or lack thereof.
Yes.
You express yourself through speech.
Yes.
Through writing down, the press, or through who you gather with, and your ability to complain. Okay? So I'll read the whole First Amendment, but then we're going to break it down. We're going to have an individual video segment, audio segment, on each part of the First Amendment because it's that important.
And there's probably 5 parts that we're talking about.
I think there's 5, but it might be in the course of our discussion. We're gonna make 6. I don't know. We'll see how this goes.
You're the political science guy.
And by the way, I do want to say, I want to apologize to constitutional scholars out there who are listening. And I don't know if you want to apologize to historians in any sort of way.
Under no circumstances.
But I am not a lawyer. I'm a political scientist.
Yes.
And we're talking about law here and how the Supreme Court and other courts have interpreted these words to create law. And so we're going to do our best to present that in the concise format that we have on this.
Sure, but we're really talking about the root.
Right.
But you could take this into constitutional law and just explode it out ad infinitum.
And I might try to do that a little bit here. We'll see.
All right.
But I do want to apologize to my colleagues who were the real constitutional scholars. Because this is the part, believe it or not, that I was least looking forward to is the First Amendment. Because it's so intense.
It is pretty intense.
It is so intense. So anyway, let's just read the words. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. So
I counted 5.
5 clauses in there. A ton of cases before the Supreme Court.
Tons and tons.
Tons and tons and tons. And so we'll just start with the first one. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. What does that mean, Don?
What does that mean?
And even at a deeper level, why was that something that was necessary?
Well,
would you give us the historic context first?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, religion is identity.
Okay.
And it's political identity, it's cultural identity. It is a statement about who you are as a nation, historically. Mm-hmm. I'll give you an example from the present day. One of the things that really helped capture Irish identity, historically, was the Roman Catholic faith, mm-hmm. which often put them at odds with the Church of England. Mm-hmm. So when the Church of England splits off from the Roman Catholic Church, the Irish say, well, no, we're still going to be Catholic, and there are Catholic pretenders to the throne of England, mm-hmm. even after they've gone
their separate ways.
Yeah, their separate ways. And so all of a sudden, is Irish Catholicism really about faith, or is it about an expression of nationalism?
Okay.
And what ends up happening is once you have the Republic of Ireland and it's its own nation, that Catholic identity fades a bit. And you go to Dublin now, and the visitor center for the city of Dublin is a deconsecrated Catholic cathedral.
Okay.
And so you're going, well, what, they couldn't pay the upkeep on this place? What's the story? And the answer is no, they couldn't. I mean, they've just lost that sort of that base. And so that religious identity has faded as an expression of nationalism. When this document is written, that is a big, big deal. There is such a thing as wars of religion that had racked Europe. There was religious persecution in Europe, which led to people immigrating to the United States. We oftentimes think of the Pilgrims and Puritan separatists and things like that, but there's a lot of people that wash up on our shores because they were on the outside of whatever the state religion was elsewhere. So, historically, that's where we're coming from on this. We don't want to have a state religion that if you don't ascribe to it, all of a sudden you're not really a full citizen.
But isn't there also the fact that there were several state religions?
Oh, sure.
And so the framers...
Which one are you going to pick?
Right. And the framers, you recall, in the body of the Constitution, they said there's no religious test.
Yeah.
But then when they're taking it a step further with this, they're saying, which one are we going to pick? We're not going to pick any of them.
We're not going to pick any of them. I mean, you were talking about Roman Catholic versus various flavors of Protestant, small Jewish population at that point, but also people that were free thinkers, Unitarians, you name it.
And what would you call Thomas Jefferson?
Yeah, he was a free thinker. Yeah. I mean, he's the guy that took the scissors to the Bible and just cut out everything he thought was dumb.
Yeah, got rid of the miracles and some of the other stuff.
Just take all that stuff out, and what are we left with? Some pretty good suggestions.
So the framers then created this, and they said, Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion. So therefore, in a simple way, there is no state religion.
Correct.
And you can't have a religious test. But then you have to go to the next level. What does that mean? Can you pray? Are you allowed to pray if you're a public official?
Can you put a manger scene on the courthouse square?
Can George Washington, when he is taking the oath of office, add to it, "So help me God"? Can you start a legislative session with a prayer? Can the Supreme Court, when it meets, begin with a prayer? Those are all things that they really didn't think about, but they quickly became issues.
Now, on the Supreme Court building, isn't there an inscription, Vox Populi, Vox Dei? Or is the Vox Dei not on there? I can't remember.
To be honest,
I
don't know.
The voice of the people is the voice of God?
Right. I don't know that, and I apologize. I do know that inside there is mosaics, and included in them is Moses receiving the Ten Commandments.
Yeah, the law, receiving the law.
Yeah, exactly. So there is a religious foundation that you can't deny.
There's religious heritage. I mean, it is the heritage of the people that are writing all this.
Right. But you look at the words of the Constitution, and they seem to be anti-religious, especially compared to the Declaration of Independence, which talks about a creator and us being endowed by our creator with certain rights. The Constitution itself seems to separate that. And I use that word separate deliberately.
Sure.
Is there a separation between church and state? And where did that idea come from?
So we got the historical antecedents.
Right.
That we don't want anybody frog marching us to Mass.
Yes.
Or frog marching us out of Mass. Or chaining the doors to the church and setting it on fire.
Yes.
Which also happened in Ireland at the hands of the Puritans against the Catholics. So we don't want any of that.
Right. We don't want those religious fights. But what can we do? What can we allow? What can we endorse? And so I think about Thomas Jefferson, the famous letter from the Danbury Baptist Association to Thomas Jefferson asking for a day of prayer. And Thomas Jefferson, President of the United States, I believe it was 1803, and he received this letter, and he wrote back words to the effect that I cannot do that as president because I believe that there is a separation between church and state. There is a wall of separation. And those are the words he used. And those words, that wall of separation, has been used ever since to describe the relationship. So
that's the letter.
So that's the letter from the Danbury Baptist. And so...
Well, it's interesting because subsequent presidents called for a day of prayer.
Oh, yeah. Presidents use days of prayer all the time.
Yeah.
It's just Thomas Jefferson didn't think it was appropriate, didn't think he had the power, and just said, no.
Yeah,
So
I'm not doing it.
If you guys want to pray, that's fine.
Pray away.
But I, as president, am not going to do that. That would be inappropriate. But then you go back to, well, what does Thomas Jefferson mean by a wall of separation? And, I ask my students this all the time, and I said, okay, how big is the wall? Is it a little wall that, like a garden wall you can just jump over?
Like a gnome-sized wall?
Yeah. Or is it, a huge, massive...
We're going to build a wall.
There you go.
Yeah.
And what's the answer? And is there a good answer for this? And so, as a consequence, there is no good definition of that. I mean, does the wall have a gate? Does the wall have windows that you can look through? I mean, is it made of cinder block? Is it made of brick? Is it made of iron? Or is it made of
tissue
sand?
paper?
Yeah, exactly. And Thomas Jefferson, by making a point, created a bigger problem. And can you...
Won't be the first time he did that.
Yeah, that's true. Can you really separate church and state? Now, think, for example, of a silly thing. You've got a church. The fire department has a responsibility to make sure that all buildings are fire code safe.
Yeah.
So how many people can you put in a church? Can the fire department come in and say, oh, you can only have 260 people in your place of worship?
But our religion requires us to have 300.
Yeah. What can you do about that? Does the government have the right to interfere? And you think that's a silly little thing, but no, it's not. It's a real thing.
Well,
Does your
and should
church-
fire departments be putting out fires at churches?
Yeah. Oh, see, that's another thing. What if your church has a kitchen? Health code.
Yeah.
Does the government have a responsibility to be involved in that, to make sure that people don't get sick and die? Okay? So these are just some of the issues that have come up over time because of the words of this Constitution. And the framers, I think they thought in the most innocent way, we've got to say that there is no established religion. But there's...
Which, thank goodness they did.
Oh, exactly. But then that led to a multitude of issues then as to what does that mean. And over time, the Supreme Court, in looking at this, has said, okay, let's get rid of that whole wall analogy.
Yeah, thanks, TJ.
Okay, let's move on to something else. How about the government pursue a policy of complete neutrality towards religion?
Makes sense.
Does it?
Well, I mean, it's logical from that perspective.
Logical from
sure.
that perspective. Can you be neutral about religion is really the question. If you're a believer, do you want your government to be neutral? Isn't the government, by being neutral, saying, hey...
Picking a side by not picking a side?
Exactly.
It's
you
funny,
saying, no, we don't believe you?
when you go to military cemeteries in Europe, and I've been to quite a few,
You have.
crosses, Stars of David, some crescents,
Right.
things like that. But the Commonwealth cemeteries are not so overt,
Okay.
which I think is interesting.
What do? They have like a
Yeah,
standard...
just kind of a slab.
Okay. And then on it there might be a
Yeah, there may
symbol
be
of-
an embossed or some
Yeah.
sort of bas relief.
But we put crosses.
I mean, it's straight up. I mean, it's just rows of crosses, cross on
Christians,
cross.
Jews,
Yeah.
Muslims. Here they are.
And that's it. And now I understand there's Wiccans and
Yeah.
spaghetti monster worshippers and
Yeah.
whatever else.
Oh, spaghetti monsters. Yeah. What about them?
Well, there may be robot president number 78 may take his oath of office.
Okay, let's talk about... Do you mind if we talk about spaghetti monsters
please.
for just a second?
Let's talk about spaghetti monsters.
Because it really raises a legitimate question. People who believe in the spaghetti monster faith say that you have to have a spaghetti colander on your head when you go for government photos, for your passport photo, driver's license photo. Okay? Really? That's what they say. So when they show up for the driver's license photo, can they be asked to take that off?
Yikes.
Okay? If you leave it on, is the government endorsing that religion?
If you take it off,
If you take it off, is the government discriminating against that religion?
no good answer.
There's no good answer. And you think about, for example, prisons. What do you do about your inmates who might be religious, might need special food?
Yeah.
Days of worship. Do you give something special on Christmas Day? Do you do something special on days of fast? For Ramadan, for example.
Yeah.
I mean, these are just some of the questions that have come up over time. And so the Supreme Court has struggled with this ever since. So let me just conclude, because we're running out of time in this segment, if that's all right.
Oh, yeah, please. I'm fascinated.
What the Supreme Court has decided is they're using this test, and it's called a Lemon test. And it's after a famous case in 1971 called Lemon versus Kurtzman. And basically they said, if the government's going to interfere in religion, we're going to have to use a test. 3 parts to the test. Number 1, is the interference in religion for a secular purpose? Okay?
What's that mean?
So, secular meaning non-religious.
Sure.
So, health code violation,
Okay.
fire safety. Number 2, does the interference advance or inhibit religion? Okay?
Fire code violation does not.
Okay.
Really.
But what about displaying a nativity set on the courthouse of
Yeah, courthouse lawn.
Yeah.
Or
Does
10
that advance religion?
Or 10 Commandments.
Okay.
Or the demon statue in Oklahoma City.
There you go.
At their state
That's right.
at
I
their
forgot
state
about
capitol.
that.
Yeah.
Is that advancing or inhibiting religion? What about prayers at graduation for high school, public high school?
Or
Football
games.
Okay.
to open a day at school.
Or, yeah, I mean, there's so many things
Yeah.
you can think of. And then the third part is the government must not be excessively entangled in the religion, whatever they're going to do. So the government can't sit there and say, well, you can say this prayer, but you can't say that prayer.
And the United States Bishop declares this.
Yeah, yeah. So using that test is the way that they now approach religion.
Interesting. But it still hadn't tamped down all the controversy.
Oh, no, there's so many things that get involved. I mean, do you have a dollar bill on you?
Yeah.
If you're listening, if you're watching, pull out a dollar bill, pull out any American currency, and there's
You
words
want
on
one?
it. If you got one, let's
I
pull it
might.
out. I don't have a dollar on me, I don't believe. Do you? Let's just check
Yeah,
to be sure.
I only got big bills, Paul.
Well,
No,
that's okay.
I've got a single right here.
Okay, now, what does it say about God on it?
My gosh. Have to look.
Yeah, you don't read your dollar bills. We're looking.
I'm looking at the back. Annuit coeptus,
Okay.
novus ordo seclorum.
What about the front?
There's George.
There's George.
Looking. I see nothing.
You see nothing. Doesn't it say someplace, in God we trust?
Well, I guess it will.
Wait, it says it right there on the backside. You missed it, right above the word one.
Oh, yeah, well, sure. I was going straight for the Latin. But it does say in God we trust, so that's assuming that God is God and not in Spaghetti Monster we trust.
Okay, well,
Or in Allah we
wait.
trust.
Are we establishing a religion here? By putting it on our currency?
We certainly seem to be leaning towards one over another.
We're certainly leaning towards something here,
Yeah.
as opposed to no God at all. And not only are we acknowledging a God, but we're saying that there's a relationship between us and
A
God.
trust relationship.
A trust relationship. That's a pretty heavy-duty thing on our currency. So, what
Does that
is
violate
going on
this?
here?
Does that violate the First Amendment?
Does it violate the First Amendment? And the Supreme Court has had to deal with this. Think about, for example, our Pledge of Allegiance. I
One
pledge
nation
allegiance,
under
one
God.
nation under
well,
God.
under God was added in the 50s to separate us from the godless communists.
Right.
So let's make
But it's still there.
It is still there now.
It's still there. So what happened is that the Supreme Court, in looking at it, says, "Oh, it seems like we're establishing a God. We're establishing a religion. We can't do that." So what they've come up with is the idea of a secular deity. When we see these references to God
Yeah.
on our bills, on our coins, Pledge of Allegiance, what we're actually acknowledging is a secular, a non-religious deity, a non-religious God.
Gray-haired, bearded guy on the roof of the Sistine Chapel God.
Whatever you're saying,
Yeah.
except the Sistine Chapel is in the Vatican, so it's Roman Catholic. So.
Yeah, but I mean, that God's not the one jumping around doing stuff.
Well, who knows, you know?
He's just almost touching at him.
Okay.
Or just pulling off him at him.
But here, in this
Yes.
legalistic sense, we're saying that there is, in essence, a secular religion, a secular deity, and we're not making any further claims on it at all. And that's the way they get around the Establishment Clause of the Constitution.
Interesting.
Yeah. And
You're not convinced.
I have truncated 200 years of legal doctrine into about 15 minutes, and
Yeah.
I'm sorry, but this is
little more than 15 minutes, but still.
this is such a touchy area, a controversial area of the Constitution.
And it seems so simple on the surface.
It seems so simple. I mean, the Supreme Court, in its term that has just concluded in 2019 here, they had to deal with this in the case of a cross. That
A
was
war
built up-
memorial
a
from World War
War
I, yeah.
War I, and they had to deal with this.
Yeah.
And how do you make that acceptable or not acceptable? Are you establishing a religion by having a cross there? And should the military be allowed to have chaplains? You know, those are the kind of things that lead directly from what's in the Constitution.
And I have to be convinced that there was injury involved on anybody's part by a cross that's a war memorial. But
Right. And the Supreme Court, it was a fascinating decision. One of the Jewish justices said, "Doesn't the cross mean something?" She says, "Isn't it the sign of what your Savior went through?" And she says, "I, as a Jew," and I'm paraphrasing it, "I, as a Jew, think that it's important." And so the fact that it's supported by the state is telling me the state supports Christianity. And then one of the Catholics on the court, in their decision,
said, y'all put him there.
said, no.
Oh, that's an old argument.
that's-
Sorry.
No. Instead, they said, oh, the cross is just a symbol. There's nothing special about it. So you ended up in the ironic situation where there was a Jewish justice, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, explaining the theology of the cross, and a Catholic justice, Neil Gorsuch, diminishing the theology of the cross to allow it to continue to stay. It's just a bizarre situation here.
That's a bizarre clause.
Yeah, this really, really is. So,
All right, so
sorry.
that's the first of the First Amendment.
welcome.
Yeah,
to the First
welcome
Amendment.
to the amendments.
Okay,
Interesting. All right, so that's our line for this time.
that's our line
And
for
we're
this
going to
time.
take the next chunk of the First Amendment to the Constitution next time.